The settlement pulsed with the rhythm of a people who had long grown used to walking with their eyes lowered. The alien banners hung above every street, their edges snapping in the wind, reminders that this world belonged not to the men and women who tilled its soil, but to those who had conquered it. Still, humans moved through the dust with quiet determination, surviving, working, raising families, holding to the little sparks of dignity that occupation could not strip away. A father guided his son through the crowded market. The boy clutched a simple wooden toy carved by his father's hand, its edges rough, but its meaning precious. The father had once seen whole cities burn under alien ships, but here, in this corner of a subdued world, he chose to raise his child with hope. The boy's laughter rose easily, unscarred by the bitterness that his father carried in silence. The crowd parted as a squad of Galactic soldiers approached, armored and radiant in their artificial authority. They walked as if the streets themselves bent for them. Conversations died down, merchants lowered their gazes, and even the wind seemed to hush. Among them strode one soldier whose cruelty was as effortless as breathing. He carried himself not as a protector but as a predator, finding pleasure in the fear that trailed behind him. The boy, unaccustomed to the ritual of submission, did not step aside quickly enough. He simply stood with wide eyes, watching the towering figure advance. The soldier's shadow fell across him, and in that moment, the boy's innocence collided with the soldier's arrogance. A sharp motion followed, a hand across the face, a sound that cracked louder than the banners in the wind. The boy staggered, clutching his cheek, his toy dropping into the dust. The market froze. Mothers covered their children's eyes, fathers tightened their jaws, and merchants kept their hands steady though their hearts thundered. The boy's father did not rush forward, nor did he shout. He bent down, lifted the toy from the dirt, brushed it clean with deliberate care, and handed it back to his son. His hand lingered on the boy's shoulder, steadying him, as his eyes rose to meet the soldier's. There was no fire in that gaze, no flaring anger to amuse the onlookers. Instead, there was stillness, the kind that precedes storms. The soldier smirked, reveling in the spectacle, convinced he had reminded these creatures of their place. With a dismissive gesture, he and his squad moved on, their laughter scattering across the marketplace like shards of glass. The boy looked up, his cheek red, his toy clutched tightly, confusion swimming in his young eyes. Why had no one stopped the soldier? Why had his father stayed silent? The father placed a hand against his son's face, not to heal the bruise, but to ground him. Words were unnecessary. He knew the boy would remember this moment not as defeat, but as the moment his father made a choice. Beneath the quiet, the man's mind unfolded like a map. He recalled faces of men who had once underestimated him on battlefields far beyond this colony, their arrogance shattered when they realized what humanity could do when pressed too far. He had hidden that past behind the life of a worker, blending into the conquered masses. But the strike against his son tore away that disguise. Some insults demanded response. Some moments carved themselves into the marrow of a man, binding him to an oath without the need for words. The boy tugged at his sleeve, seeking comfort, but the father's expression never shifted. Only his eyes betrayed the weight of the vow settling inside him. It was not rage. Rage burned bright and quickly. This was colder, steadier, a flame meant to last until the debt was paid. Around them, the market cautiously returned to life. People whispered, casting glances, half pitying, half admiring. They could not know what had just begun, for they had never seen how dangerous one human could be when a child's tears marked the line. The father straightened, the banners above him snapping in the wind, their colors bold but meaningless now. The soldier believed he had struck a boy. In truth, he had struck humanity itself, and the answer would not come in a shout or a plea. It would come in silence, precise and merciless, delivered by the hand of a man who had been underestimated one time too many. The boy, reassured by the steady hand on his shoulder, clutched his toy again. He did not yet understand that the look in his father's eyes was not simply protection but promise. And as they walked away from the marketplace, dust rising with every step, the man carried not only his son but the quiet certainty that one by one, the offenders would learn what it meant to raise a hand against a human child. ChatGPT said, He returned home without a word to anyone, carrying his son as though the weight of the world rested in his arms. The child's cheek was already swelling, but he did not cry anymore. Silence wrapped around them both, broken only by the crunch of gravel underfoot. When they reached the modest dwelling that served as their shelter, the boy curled against his father, seeking rest, and the man sat awake in the dim light. His gaze never left the shadows. Once, years ago, he had worn armor of his own, though not polished or adorned with insignias like the aliens. His armor had been forged from desperation, built of scraps and human ingenuity, cobbled together by those who refused to surrender. He remembered nights when men and women plotted beneath flickering lamps, drawing maps with trembling hands, facing enemies who outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. He had seen humans fall in droves, yet he had also seen victories carved from nothing but cleverness and resolve. Those victories had not come because humans were stronger, but because they adapted faster, turned weakness into advantage, and never stopped fighting once a cause sank into their bones. He had set that life aside when his son was born. The galaxy had demanded enough blood, and he had thought perhaps survival would be enough for his child. But now, staring into the dark, he realized survival alone was a lie. A hand across his son's face had revealed what peace truly meant under occupation, humiliation disguised as order. And if that was peace, then war was the only honest answer left to him. He began quietly. He memorized faces, every soldier who had laughed in the marketplace, every officer who had turned away. He watched them not as a beaten man but as a hunter. He tracked the way they moved, where they ate, which alleys they favored when leaving the garrison. He noted the schedules of patrols, how their armor was removed for maintenance, the lapses in vigilance when they drank or played their games of chance. His memory was sharp, disciplined by years of survival, and nothing escaped it. In the evenings, when his son asked simple questions about the stars or the toy in his hands, he answered softly, as though nothing had changed. But beneath the gentleness, his mind sharpened like a blade. He studied supply lines and waste channels, remembered the maintenance tunnels carved into the colony when it had first been human-built. He saw opportunities everywhere, invisible to those who strutted above the people as conquerors. The alien soldier who had struck his boy had not acted out of strategy or necessity. He had acted out of contempt. That contempt blinded them, the same way it always had. The man recalled campaigns long past where arrogant foes underestimated human endurance. Again and again, that arrogance had been their undoing. These Galactics were no different. They believed humans weak because they bowed, because they avoided confrontation, because they endured quietly. They mistook patience for submission. That mistake would cost them. Each night, after his son slept, he handled old tools with practiced hands. A piece of wire became more than refuse, it became a key. A length of pipe became more than scrap, it became a weapon. His resourcefulness returned to him as naturally as breathing. He had not forgotten the old ways, he had simply buried them. Now they surfaced again, honed by memory, strengthened by purpose. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. To his son, he said only what the boy needed to hear, that no one would hurt him again, that he was safe. But in the silence after, the man repeated a vow to himself. It was not enough to protect. He would correct. He would balance the scales so precisely that those who mocked humanity would vanish into silence, and none would mistake patience for weakness again. The colony carried on with its routines, unaware of what stirred in their midst. People saw only a father walking to market, working his shifts, raising his child. They did not see the calculating gaze that lingered on every soldier who passed, or the way his hands tested tools as if weighing their potential. He kept his plans hidden, for secrecy was the first step toward victory. What he intended would not be shouted in the streets. It would be written in the absence of those who once swaggered across them. The boy's bruise faded, but the memory did not. The father looked at it every day, not with sorrow but with clarity. That mark was a reminder, etched into flesh, of the price of submission. It would guide him as surely as a map. He did not imagine revenge as rage or chaos. His revenge would be orderly, deliberate, and final. One by one, those who had laughed would learn the truth that echoed across human history. The worst mistake any conqueror could make was to forget that humans, when pressed to defend their children, did not stop until the threat was gone. And so the man prepared, patient as stone, cold as iron, certain as dawn. The first disappearance came quietly. A soldier who had once smirked as the boy staggered in the dust did not report for duty. His quarters were found empty, his armor resting neatly on its stand, as though he had simply stepped out and never returned. The others joked at first, believing him drunk or careless, until days passed with no word. The laughter faded into unease. Then another was gone. This one vanished during his evening walk back from the gambling den. The cards he had won lay scattered in the dirt where his trail ended. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing but silence. Whispers began to ripple through the ranks, low and uneasy. They had believed themselves untouchable, their power absolute. Now shadows pressed against them, stripping away the illusion of safety they wore like armor. The man moved with patience, striking only when certainty guided his hand. He did not rush, for haste left traces. Each removal was a message written without words. The days of impunity had ended. Soldiers who once swaggered through the market now walked in pairs, their eyes darting to every alley. Even their voices lowered, fear dulling the arrogance that had been their constant companion. It was not brute force that dismantled them. Their technology and weapons outmatched any human tool. But arrogance had softened them, dulled their instincts, left gaps wide enough for a patient hunter to exploit. The man used those gaps with surgical precision. He watched, waited, and chose moments when they were most vulnerable, alone, drunk, inattentive. No grand battles, no spectacles. Only sudden silence where once there had been cruelty. Rumors spread among the civilians as well. Some said a ghost hunted the occupiers. Others whispered that the spirits of the oppressed had risen to strike back. Only a few suspected the truth, that one man had chosen to balance the scales. Those few stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of respect. They knew the wound that had driven him, and they would not betray the justice being carved in the dark. The boy noticed the change around him. The soldiers no longer strode with careless cruelty. Their eyes flicked constantly, and their laughter had vanished from the streets. He did not understand the cause, but he felt the difference. The air itself seemed lighter when he walked beside his father. He still clutched his wooden toy, but now he carried it with pride rather than fear. The father never explained. Some lessons were better learned in silence. Each act was deliberate, a piece of a larger pattern. The man did not kill indiscriminately, nor did he strike at random. Only those who had stood by, who had mocked, who had made themselves complicit in the insult were chosen. One by one they were erased, until the squad that had once strutted through the market was a memory dissolving into dread. Their absence spoke louder than any declaration. The commanders above grew restless. They issued orders, tightened patrols, demanded answers. But their soldiers, once so confident, offered none. Fear had hollowed them out. No one admitted to hearing footsteps in the dark, or seeing eyes where none should be. They avoided speaking the truth aloud, for naming the hunter gave him weight. Yet the weight was already crushing them. The man felt no triumph in the removals. He did not savor the acts, nor did he linger over them. Each was a task completed, another step in a vow kept. His satisfaction lay not in the fall of the soldiers, but in the quiet dignity it restored. No child in that colony would believe the occupiers invincible again. Not after seeing how they trembled, how they vanished, how they bled fear into the streets they once ruled. The cycle continued until silence became the defining trait of the squad. Where once they had been loud, brutal, and mocking, now only absence remained. The boy's bruise had long since faded, but the lesson endured. When he looked up at his father, he saw not just protection, but certainty. A certainty that cruelty carried a cost, and that even the smallest insult against humanity could unravel an empire's illusion of control. What began as a slap in the market had become a reckoning, one life at a time. The disappearances forced the higher ranks to take notice. Whispers among the common soldiers became reports filed in clipped, uneasy tones. A pattern emerged too clearly to dismiss, a squad once arrogant and loud now reduced to shadows and silence. Their absence carried a message sharper than any weapon, and it reached the ears of a commander who believed fear was a weakness to be crushed. He arrived with the weight of authority, cloaked in the pride of his station, certain he would restore order where his subordinates had failed. His first act was to declare humans harmless, incapable of such precise defiance. He scoffed at the idea that one of them could outwit galactic discipline. To him, the losses were the result of cowardice, deserters who had abandoned their posts. He paraded through the streets, flanked by guards, ensuring every eye saw the strength of his presence. His words rang with contempt, painting humans as vermin who survived only because the galaxy allowed them to. The audience lowered their heads, but behind their silence lay the memory of soldiers vanishing without a trace. They knew arrogance when they saw it, and they recognized the same mistake repeating itself. The father studied this new arrival with the same patience he had given the others. He did not strike quickly, for this opponent required more than silence in the dark. A commander demanded exposure, forced into the open where his authority offered no shield. So the father watched, listening to speeches, observing the rituals of command, measuring the man not by his uniform but by his habits. He saw the reliance on routine, the blind faith in subordinates, the assumption that fear alone guaranteed obedience. Those habits revealed cracks as wide as any alleyway. Days passed, and the commander's frustration grew. He tightened curfews, doubled patrols, issued threats of collective punishment. Yet for all his bluster, the disappearances continued. A guard posted to watch the market failed to return. Another, sent to monitor the tunnels beneath the city, vanished without sound. With each loss, the commander's anger deepened, but so too did the dread among his soldiers. They looked to him for reassurance, but his speeches rang hollow against the quiet efficiency of their unseen adversary. The father chose his moment with care. It was not enough to dismantle the squad. The commander himself had to understand. When the time came, the confrontation was not a clash of weapons but a collision of resolve. The man stepped from silence as though he had been there all along, his presence calm, deliberate, and unshaken by the display of alien power before him. Words were few, but each carried the weight of centuries of human defiance. He did not threaten, did not beg, did not justify. He simply declared through action and presence that no insult to his son would go unanswered, no cruelty left unbalanced. The commander, armored in pride, sought to reassert control. He raised his voice, summoned threats, and relied on the intimidation that had always bent others. Yet he found no fear in the man before him. Instead, he faced stillness, colder than rage, sharper than hatred. The silence between them became unbearable, heavy with inevitability. The father's refusal to bow or even acknowledge alien superiority shattered the illusion of dominance more effectively than any weapon. The fall of the commander was not marked by spectacle. It was precise, final, the culmination of patience meeting arrogance. His authority dissolved in the moment he realized the truth. Humans could not be ruled through humiliation, for every slight planted a seed of resistance that grew in silence until it consumed its target. His soldiers saw it too, and their fears spread like wildfire. Their commander, once untouchable, was now a cautionary tale. The colony felt the shift. No longer did the occupiers stride with unchecked cruelty. Their gazes lingered too long on shadows, their steps quickened when passing through alleys. The people noticed, and for the first time in years, they walked a little taller. They spoke softly, but their words carried hope instead of despair. One man had taken the arrogance of an empire and stripped it bare, revealing that even the most powerful could fall when they forgot the resolve of those they sought to dominate. The boy, though too young to grasp the scale of what had transpired, sensed the change in the air. His father's presence was the anchor, and the silence around them no longer felt heavy with submission but alive with possibility. A hand once raised against a child had brought down more than a squad. It had toppled the illusion of control that bound an entire people. The commander's absence spread through the colony like smoke carried on a silent wind. No announcement marked his fall, no explanation soothed the troops who remained. His quarters stood empty, his authority dissolved into whispers. Soldiers once eager to dominate now clung to routine as if it might shield them. They no longer swaggered through the markets or raised their voices in cruel amusement. Instead, they moved quickly, eyes darting, steps short, wary of the unseen reckoning that had already consumed so many of their kind. Among the people, fear did not vanish, but it shifted. It was no longer fear of the conquerors. It was fear of what had awakened within their midst. They spoke in low tones about the quiet human who had endured in silence until his sun was struck. They did not need confirmation, for the truth was carried in the weight of absence. Each disappearance, each silence where arrogance once thrived, told them more clearly than words ever could. Something had changed forever. The boy saw only fragments of this transformation, but he felt its impact. He walked beside his father without glancing nervously at patrols, without shrinking when armored figures passed. The streets themselves seemed altered, their shadows no longer cloaked in despair but alive with a cautious pride. He did not know the scale of what had been done in his name, but he understood the unspoken promise that no one would ever strike him again. The toy in his hand became more than comfort. It became a reminder of what had been defended with relentless resolve. The father did not seek recognition. He returned to his daily routines as though nothing had transpired. His silence remained unbroken, his expression unchanged, but those who looked closely saw the difference. There was no submission in his bearing now, only steadiness. He carried himself as one who had balanced an old debt and would not hesitate to do so again if provoked. His very presence became a warning sharper than any blade. Word spread beyond the colony. Messengers and reports carried fragments of the story to other outposts. Tales grew in the retelling. A phantom who struck from shadows, a spirit of vengeance awakened by injustice, a human who erased an entire squad and their commander without leaving a trace. The details blurred, but the essence remained. Humanity was not to be treated as powerless. The idea seated itself in alien ranks, a whisper that undermined certainty. Even those who mocked the stories found themselves watching shadows more closely, doubting their safety where once they had been sure. Among the humans, the legend took firmer root. Parents told their children to hold their heads high, for even the smallest among them carried the legacy of defiance. Workers in the fields straightened their backs when soldiers passed. Traders in the markets allowed themselves small smiles when they remembered how quickly arrogance could collapse. The people did not know when or where the next act of resistance would come, but they no longer doubted it would. They had seen what one man could do when pushed too far. The father's son grew in this atmosphere of quiet defiance. He did not see his father's actions as violence but as protection, as proof that dignity was not something to be surrendered. He carried that lesson with him, etched deeper than the memory of a hand across his face. It became part of him, shaping the way he looked at the galaxy, reminding him always that no force, no matter how vast, was beyond reach when humanity chose to act. The occupiers tried to replace the fallen with new troops, harder men with stricter orders. But even they moved with caution. The memory of their predecessors weighed heavily, and the silence surrounding their end eroded the certainty of power. Every step through the colony felt watched, every night heavy with unease. They could not admit it aloud, but they understood. They were no longer feared. The father walked with his son beneath the stars, their path lit by the faint glow of alien towers. He did not need to explain the meaning of what had happened, for the truth lived in every hushed voice, every cautious glance from soldiers, every proud step taken by those once bowed. His silence said enough. The galaxy would learn what this colony already knew, that striking a human child was not an act of dominance but the beginning of an ending. The warning lingered, etched not in stone but in memory. One by one, those who had mocked had vanished. An empire's certainty had cracked under the weight of a single man's resolve. And though no proclamation marked the shift, every being who passed through that world carried with them the lesson carved in absence. Humanity was not to be measured by its submission, but by what it became when provoked. The boy tightened his grip on his father's hand. Above them, the stars stretched infinite and indifferent. But within that vastness, a truth now pulsed brighter than banners, louder than any order. Humanity endured, humanity defended, and humanity, once roused, did not stop until the scales were even.